This is Sandman being made for people who love Sandman by people who love Sandman.
We're getting into all the challenges and behind-the-scenes visions of everything that brought this incredible series to the silver screen.
I'm here at Shepperton Studios, and I'm getting to see what happens when you bring dreams to life.
Number 1. Tom Sturridge, who plays Dream, was basically naked for the entirety of the first episode. The way he was first introduced to his fellow castmates was
naked, climbing into a glass sphere.
And because of the way the sphere was designed, they couldn't open it super easily, so he would be in there by himself for hours at a time. One aspect he loved about that though was how that really helped him get into character.
In that silence, you can only ever really believe yourself to be a character.
Number 2. Speaking of getting into character, one thing Tom really struggled with was being introduced as a protagonist who doesn't speak, or even move much for that matter.
It was incredibly important to me to somehow articulate this otherworldliness.
He had a lot to convey with just his body and facial expressions. While using no words, he needed to show the audience that he wasn't human. He was an eternal being who spent his every fiber holding all these universes' dreams together. That's a lot of pressure with no dialogue.
I did work very hard, hopefully, to create an image that would tell an audience that story with no words.
Number 3. The Realm of Lucifer Morningstar. The VFX team spent more time on this episode than any other episode. There are so many incredible practical effects. The gate, for example, is an actual sculpture. At first, they didn't even know if they should show the set on screen. VFX supervisor Ian Markowitz tells Dan of Geek, "Anything that we show of Lucifer's palace is going to be disappointing. No matter what it is, no matter how cool it is, whatever we show is going to be a little underwhelming." But it turned out to be their most rewarding episode. They ended up utilizing real-life images like the Vatican and a specific cathedral in Milan as inspiration. Number 4. So much was actually built practically.
Our art department, our set decorators, our production designers, they are wizards.
It was really important to Neil Gaiman and the rest of the show's creators that whenever they could create or build something, they would do it. There's actually not a ton of CGI in the show compared to what you might think. They even had a real raven on set. It didn't speak, unfortunately, but Tom did get to interact with a real live bird.
Having a raven there was amazing, just something that, like, you're talking, it's like...
Number 5. Who else is a fan of Despair's Crocs? For starters, Jenna Coleman's character, Johanna, went through almost a dozen different costume iterations before they landed on her iconic trench coat look.
Also, I got really overexcited about having a crucifix in my boot.
For Tom Sturridge's costume design, they also went through a few different looks. At first, he just wanted to be as true to the comic book character as he could get.
And I wanted my hair to be wild, and I wanted my eyes to be as dark as night.
But obviously, that's not the dream we ended up with.
Neil will agree with me, is I looked ridiculous.
They ended up sticking with Tom's more natural look, as they found that to be a better fit for the screen. Number 6. We've gotta talk about Matthew. Considering they really wanted to take a mostly practical effect with this show, they definitely wanted their CGI to be as top-notch as possible. Ian Markowitz shared his story in creating Matthew with Den of Geek. It is probably the most successful CG feather bird that I've seen, on film or television. And that's saying a lot, because we had a photoreal aspiration for something that was known. The thing was either going to look like a real bird or it wasn't. Matthew not only had to look real, but he had to fly, move, and interact with the rest of the cast. Considering he was once human himself, they had to create facial expressions that resembled natural human emotion. Not a simple task. Number 7. We're all familiar with the famous John Constantine. That's the reason why he's not in the show. Neil thought he'd been represented enough in the media, so he pitched the idea to Allan about turning him into Johanna.
We both thought about Jenna and Jenna's voice, and that went a long way just in terms of my conception of who she was.
They wanted to do a fresh spin on the character, so they took what they loved about John and brought new life into it.
And we just had a lot of fun, I think, on all fronts.
Number 8. There were several Sandman movie and television pitches that didn't work over the years. Neil Gaiman always felt passionate about bringing Sandman to life, but only if it could be done in the right way. He told IGN, "I didn't care about it getting made. I would so much rather that it never got made than a bad version would get made." Even a director he really respects, Eric Kripke, pitched a Sandman series for network TV in 2010. Neil Gaiman had many reservations about that at the time. The damage that you had to do to Sandman to put it on network TV 15 years ago, and in the kind of budgets and the way that you could do it, just meant it wasn't Sandman. Number 9. If you'd read the comics, you'd know how well they pulled this off. When filming the show, they really wanted as many scenes as they could manage to be like you pulled it straight off the page.
What was really thrilling was remembering how accurately some of those frames were replicated.
They always had a copy of the graphic novel right next to the camera.
That was so important to us when we were making it.
Number 10. Ian Markowitz definitely had his hands full here. Something really beautiful, but also incredibly difficult about the show was that every episode is different from the one before it, with Dream being the only thing holding the timeline together. Ian shares his experience working on the show's wide range of sets. It's not a procedural, where we're doing similar things next week. There's always something that's going to be different about the next episode, and Dream may not be on screen for every frame of the show, but he is always going to be at the heart of things. Number 11. Not even his original comics or panels from 1989. We're talking about the scripts he wrote for artists before any of that even got onto the page. When Ian Markowitz was brought on as the VFX supervisor, he found the project to be a bit daunting at first because of how well known the world of Sandman already was. He describes having been given Neil's notes as being gifted gold. He explains, "I thought that starting with Neil's notes was the perfect way for us to think about adapting the show, because sometimes the comic book panel is very comic booky, and it has that wild, quirky, zany quality, which I don't think the show has all of that much." Number 12. Not only did Tom Sturridge go through it with his look, but he also had to mentally prepare to become the eternal being that is Morpheus. Neil gave him some pertinent advice on how Dream carries himself.
He has thought every thought that could ever be thought or could ever be conceived of.
With every line he said, he had to utilize his voice to convey that message to us.
Therefore, when he speaks, it should feel as if it's etched in stone.
Number 13. If anyone can do it, Neil Gaiman can.
Neil Gaiman was the key.
The Sandman comics were first released over 3 decades ago, but the cult following has remained extremely dedicated. It makes sense that a casual dinner conversation between Neil Gaiman, Allan Heinberg, and David Goyer would lead to a Netflix pitch 3 days later.
Honestly, that sort of felt like, okay, well, it feels like it would be a TV first season.
Number 14. They actually had the cast before the writing was even finished. Allan Heinberg was extremely grateful that the Sandman already had such a massive following. They were able to cast for it pretty much immediately. Having the cast at hand was highly preferred, as Allan likes to write with the actor's voice in mind. One of the characters that went through the most transformation on the page was Corinthian.
Neil and I decided, you know what, we're going to embrace everything that Boyd is.
Boyd Holbrook being cast completely changed the way they approached the character.
And there was a version of that with Viv and with everybody in the cast.
Number 15. There has to be at least one. There are so many incredible characters with stories worth following. When talking about the end of Sandman, it makes it much easier for the showrunners to see the end when you have source material you're going off of. But something unknown that excites them are all the potential series they could create from other characters.
There are death miniseries we'd love to explore doing. There are other characters worthy of having their own adventures.
So after going through the practical set designs, comic book replicas, costumes, and Neil Gaiman's vintage Sandman scripts, we're still completely floored by all the incredible talent and dedication it took to bring this series to life. What were you most excited to see on screen?